Hi, welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Congressman Mark Pocan. With us today for one question is the president of the League of Conservation Voters, one of the biggest national organizations fighting for clean air and clean water and public lands and everything good environmentally. Their president, Pete Maysmith. Pete, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Representative Pocan. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, thank you. So our question for you is, if you had the ability to change any one federal law, now you don't even have to go through Mike Johnson or anyone, just you just say it, it happens. What would that one federal law change be and why?
The one change that I would make is to undo the budget reconciliation, or the big ugly bill that has only been the law for about 5 weeks in this country. Why would I would do that? Is because it attacks the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most significant piece of climate legislation that's ever passed anywhere in this world. Mm-hmm. And because the the big ugly is going to make people's lives more expensive.
Yeah.
And that's just not okay. We want to stand up and say we can help address affordability by using more of the cheapest and fastest form of energy out there to keep your utility bills from spiking through the roof. And you know what? That's wind and solar and storage, batteries, mm-hmm. things like that. So I would undo that. I'd bring back all those great elements of the Inflation Reduction Act. It would make people's lives cheaper. It would bring jobs back all over the country to
like 100,000 jobs, I think.
Hundreds of thousands of jobs all over the district. And it would help tackle, it is helping to tackle the law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the climate crisis, which we all know is ever present in our lives. 11 inches of rain in Milwaukee, forest fires in Colorado, deadly and just heart-wrenching floods in Texas, fires that just boggled the mind to see the destruction in Los Angeles, mm-hmm. and many, many more, right? Climate change is here. We have to tackle it. Let's create jobs and bring costs down as we do it.
That's a great answer. Thanks so much, Pete, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Really glad to be here.
It's a tough time for workers in this country with the Trump presidency. Not only has the administration made it harder for workers' rights and unions, but some workers get hit harder whenever any workers get hurt. And that includes domestic workers. Domestic workers are some of the hardest working professionals you'll meet, but unfortunately, traditionally face the lowest pay and worst working conditions. But thanks to some national organizations, there have been some improvements for these workers despite this unfriendly worker environment with the Trump administration. Rights in at least 10 states and several major cities such as Philadelphia and Seattle have been extended to over 2 million home care workers, providing them with minimum wage protections. That's because of the hard work of the Domestic Workers Alliance. And who leads this organization? Ai-jen Poo, a labor leader, organizer, and author. Ai-jen has been the executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance since 2010. She's been recognized among Fortune's 50 world's greatest leaders and Time's 100 most influential people in the world. She also co-hosts the podcast Sun Store. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Ai-jen Poo. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Congressman.
Well, thank you. And this is a subject that I think we need to have more people understand. And I think we can continue to improve the conditions for workers everywhere. So let's start by telling us a little bit about the National Domestic Workers Alliance and why you're doing this work.
Okay, sure. Well, the Domestic Workers Alliance works with the women, mostly women, some men, who work inside of our homes as caregivers and cleaners. So the nannies who take care of kids, or the home care workers who support our aging and disabled loved ones, and the cleaners who restore order in our sometimes chaotic homes. These are workers who do the work that makes everything else possible in our lives, taking care of some of the most precious aspects of our lives, but it's some of the most insecure and undervalued work in our entire economy. Most workers have no access to benefits, no job security, no safety net, and often unpredictable hours. And the majority of domestic workers are also primary income earners for their families and their moms. And so this income is what entire families are relying on for to make ends meet every day. And so our work at the Domestic Workers Alliance is to make these jobs good jobs for the 22nd century. And it's no small task because there's a really long history of exclusion from basic rights and protections dating all the way back to the New Deal. And you and I can nerd out on that history. But we are dedicated to making sure that these jobs are pathways to real opportunity and prosperity for these workers who we know are essential to our economy and our future.
And what brought you to this work?
It's a good question. Whenever I get this question, I have a different answer because every day something new strikes
Sure.
me. But, my grandmother played a big role in raising me. She passed away during COVID at the age of 94, but she was a big part of my childhood. And she was one of those people that always said to me, if you see a problem, do not dare complain about it, fix it, find a solution. And she believed that there is, no matter how big or how deeply seated the problem was, there was always a solution. And our job is to figure out how to make it better for our family members, for future generations. And she was a true optimist and very kind of like no BS.
Yeah.
And I think growing up, she also trained me to look for the problems that nobody else was going to solve, and to see what we could do about solving them. And so this was one of them that I encountered really early on as I was in the Asian American community in New York City. So many of the women in our community were working in the caregiving industry or professions as domestic workers or childcare workers or home care workers. And the wages were so low and people were working so hard. And I remember just thinking to myself at 20, how could it be that so many people are working so hard and still can't pay the bills?
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about the workers, the caregivers and the cleaners. Can you talk, just a little more about the types of workers? Because I know from, I've served in local, state, and federal office, and when you knock on a lot of doors and you talk to people who are receiving that care, there was a building in my original county board district, 3 decades ago, where it was many people who had developmental or had physical disability issues in particular, and they could go through 3 or 4 caregivers in a year because the wages were so low. But it's such a personal thing. It's the people bathing them. It's the people sometimes feeding them. And it's just give us a little more rich perspective of who these workers are, because I guarantee everyone's family has been impacted.
Everyone has someone in their lives who has needed care or has provided care. And I think that it is so underappreciated how much skill and tenacity and capacity is required to do this work.
Yeah.
So think about the home care workers who during COVID were really an essential lifeline. In some cases, the only people who were supporting people like our parents, our grandparents. And so the job is every day to go to work and to ensure that the person in your charge, in your care, has quality of life and dignity and can live a full life. For people with disabilities, having access to home care assistance is the difference between being completely segregated and
Right.
isolated and actually being able to go to school to be able to go to work, to be a
Mhm.
contributor, and to offer what you have to give to society to society. And so it is everything from supporting what they call activities of daily living, like toileting and bathing and feeding and cleaning, to the very emotional and, as you say, like deeply trusted, intimate
Yeah.
work, right?
Mhm.
And it's about trust. You're allowing people to come into your homes, to come into your life, and so care workers take that responsibility so seriously, and no one is in it for the money. The median income for a home care worker in America today is under $22,000 per
Wow.
year,
Wow. Yeah.
right? So how many
Yeah.
people in your district can pay the bills on $22,000 per year?
Exactly. You started to mention that it's largely women in these professions. What are some of the demographics so that people can understand too, maybe um, why we need to do more in this area?
Well, it's always overwhelmingly been women in the caring professions, whether it's childcare, direct care, domestic work, more than 80% women. Interestingly, increasing numbers of men are also entering the field,
Mhm.
but it's still overwhelmingly women and majority women of color, including a third of whom are immigrants. So people who were
Okay.
born in other countries and have come here. So the backbone of our caregiving system and our ability to care for our families, and also the ability to go to work as family caregivers or working parents, really relies upon a workforce of women, and overwhelmingly women of color and immigrant women.
Yeah. And, given everything with this current administration, um, what are some of the current issues that domestic workers are facing? And I think, you've already, I think, started to talk about many of them are immigrant women. And obviously, we know some of those issues, but can you talk about some of the unique challenges right now that domestic workers are facing?
Well, since the 1930s, since the New Deal was put into place, the New Deal excluded explicitly two groups of workers: agricultural workers and domestic workers. And this was because Southern Dixiecrats in Congress refused to support labor laws that would have equal protections and rights for a predominantly Black workforce. That and both farm work and domestic workers were predominantly Black at the time. And so, in a concession to those members of Congress, the Social Security Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the National Labor Relations Act all explicitly excluded these two groups of workers who were so foundational to
Mhm.
everything else in the American economy, and were treated like second class citizens. And that legacy of exclusion really set the pace and the tone
Mhm.
for how domestic work would be treated. And every generation of domestic workers has tried to organize and fight back and to be included and recognized. And the foremother of our movement was a woman named Dorothy Bolden, who started the National Domestic Workers Union in the 1970s as a part of the
Mhm.
civil rights movement. And she was the first person to make sure that domestic workers were included in minimum wage protections.
Okay.
But even when that happened in 1974, Congress made sure that there was an exemption, that home care workers specifically were still not protected even by
Mm.
minimum wage laws.
Wow.
Um, there's a whole debate in Congress, if you read the records, and they basically said that home care workers are nothing more than companions, and they sit around and have a Coke and watch TV all day. It's not real work, so to speak. And so they shouldn't have access to minimum wage and overtime. So literally until the Obama administration, home care workers, who we saw how essential they were
Yeah.
during COVID, right? Home care workers, it was perfectly legal to pay them less than our pitying
Mm.
minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. Now, during the Obama administration, me and our movement of domestic workers, we fought super hard alongside all the unions, and we got domestic workers and home care workers specifically included in minimum wage and overtime protections. Now, this administration has announced that it's going to roll back that inclusion. So they want to permanently make home care a job that you can't survive on, that is undervalued, and that is the kind of job that even today we have a 26% turnover rate because the wages are so low, which really impacts people's quality of care.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not just about the workers. We're so interconnected in the context of care. And so, this is really going to affect the numbers of people who stay in this profession, who sign up for this profession. And one of the great ironies about it is, Congressman, this is one of the fastest growing occupations in our entire workforce because of the huge demand. There's a growing aging population, and in places like rural Wisconsin, we already have a major staffing shortage when it comes to care. And we need workers to sign up to do this work, and we need them to know that we appreciate them and that they are valued, essential members of our labor market. And that is not, this is sending the opposite message. And in a time of AI, when so many other jobs are disappearing, I don't see how we can afford to degrade these jobs.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up AI. I say this is one area that you're not going to say AI can replace, right? This is the very personal work.
That's right. Congressman, we took a group of home care workers to Silicon Valley to learn about the AI tools that are being built right now.
Yeah.
And we went to Anthropic and to Google and to these companies, and they were very clear that home care workers are not going to be displaced anytime soon because they are nowhere near finding technology that can do the very human, emotional work of caring for other people in that very physical, visceral, and emotional way.
Well, as we talk about AI taking over workforce, this is one area, that alone should put a highlight on domestic workers, right? Just that alone. One of the challenges I know that we're seeing in many areas with workers, but again, I think especially targeted our domestic workers, is around the immigration laws with this administration. Can you talk about how that's having an impact on the industry?
Oh, people are terrified. I mean, domestic workers live in communities where there are roving masked ICE agents, armed, roving the streets, parked in front of churches, in schools, grocery stores. It is terrifying, the climate of fear. And most domestic workers take public transportation to get to work, buses, and people are terrified to get on the bus, to wait for the bus. People are terrified to go to work. And what that means is their own income and livelihoods are at stake, and the care that millions of families rely on is also being compromised right now. And as I said, most domestic workers are also primary income earners for their families and mothers. And so we're talking about people who are going to work every day, caring for U.S. citizen families and providing essential services, making it possible for American working parents and family caregivers to go to work in every industry we can think of. And then they're at home, they're also caregivers. They're taking care of their own family members with Alzheimer's or their own children. And they are on the front lines of the threat of family separation and of extraction. And people are being sent to countries they've never known, and detained with no due process. And people are terrified for good reason. And this is where we really need people to show up and to know that the only thing standing between these human rights abuses and all of these immigrant caregivers who we rely on is the rest of us having courage and coming forward.
Yeah. Just looking at the current environment, I know a lot of us are talking right now about the Epstein files, but it does raise the issue of trafficking. Is this something that plays any role with domestic workers and the concerns of human trafficking?
Yes, well, so human trafficking has always been a huge issue in the domestic work industry. If you think about the dynamic of domestic work, your workplace is someone else's private
Yeah,
home,
right.
and there's no list, there's no registry, and oftentimes it is immigrant women doing this work, and you are the only person in the workplace. It's not like there's a water cooler or an HR
Yeah,
department or other coworkers. So the vulnerability, the power difference between the employer and the worker is so severe already. You have basically no leverage to negotiate for anything. And you layer on top of that the fact that you have these programs historically in our immigration system, visa programs that allow you to bring a domestic worker from a different country. And it gives the employer even more power because your entire ability to be in this country legally is contingent on that person sponsoring you. And oftentimes they take your passport. And so the abuses that we have seen, it's really tantamount to modern day slavery in terms of the kinds of extreme forms of abuse that can happen in domestic work settings. And this is why we have advocated for rights and protections and standards, because when you have a Wild West environment,
yeah.
it does breed exploitation and conditions like trafficking.
One of the other issues, and we've just had this before us in Congress in the Appropriations Committee, is the cutback on job training programs and workforce development. And I think there are some folks that, are domestic workers who also have looked at these programs to try to get to higher paying jobs in some cases. Has that had a big impact as well?
It's all having an impact. I mean, the Medicaid cuts, Congressman, I'm so deeply concerned because Medicaid is the payer of over 67%, I believe, of direct care worker wages.
Yeah.
So we're talking about home care workers, we're talking about nursing home workers and assisted living, CNAs, that whole layer of frontline care workers who we rely on every day is mostly supported by the Medicaid program because we don't have another long-term care program in this country. All we have is Medicaid. If you need assistance in your home, it's Medicaid. A lot of people think it's Medicare and Medicare is going to cover long-term care. Nope. It's just Medicaid. And that means that the workforce that we count on to care for us in our homes as home care workers, 70% of those jobs are funded by Medicaid. So that's one big issue. And then all of the workforce development programs that are associated with those jobs are also reliant on Medicaid. So, Congressman, I am so worried about what this is going to mean for disabled people, older adults, and all of our families. And of course, the workforce and their families. It's just going to be devastating, I think.
And also on the labor front, this administration's been rolling back protections, including things like overtime pay, minimum wage. Have you seen that impact yet, or how are you preparing for that?
I think we haven't seen the impact directly yet, but what we have seen is costs go up significantly.
Sure.
And when you have a workforce that's already, I I think the number is 1 in 5 domestic workers relies upon some form of public assistance because of the low wages. I mean, essentially, when you're signing up to do care work, you're signing up for poverty wage work.
Yeah.
You're signing up for work that doesn't actually help you make ends meet or get on a pathway to the middle class. You're sort of in a spin of poverty, which we could change. And we were actually on a trajectory to change with the American Rescue Plan. There was a big investment of $37 billion in Medicaid, home, and community-based services. And that allowed states to start to raise wages and expand access to services. And man, we were on a trajectory towards making these jobs better jobs. And now all of that is unraveling and costs are going up. And I think there's even a set of care workers who earn, $45,000 or up who have purchased healthcare on the exchange and have benefited from the tax credits that are going to disappear at the end of this year. So I think, Congressman, that at the end of this year, you're going to start to see devastating impacts in terms of both the coming together of rising prices of food and other prices and the loss of those healthcare tax credits and people's health insurance premiums going through the roof.
Yeah, that I think, we know that they timed the Medicaid cuts till after the next election, but not the subsidies on the Affordable Care Act.
Exactly.
And that's going to be felt much, much sooner. So let's talk about some positive things because
Yes,
there's plenty
let's
of
do that.
negative things. There's been some wins in states in some bigger cities for domestic workers. Can you talk about some of those victories? And then who were some of the opponents along the way trying to stop those victories? I think we need to share that too.
Sure. So the first Domestic Worker Bill of Rights passed in 2010 in New York. And then since then, 11 additional states have passed legislation. And
Oh, great.
it's
Well,
been such an exciting thing to see, including Virginia, which was our first state in the South to pass a Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. But it's been exciting to see the momentum and to see domestic workers organizing around the country. And, in the face of a lot of both opposition and apathy, people just saying, I think a lot of legislatures feeling like, well, this has been a workforce that's kind of been treated in a separate category, in a different category for, generations. Why now? And the workers and our coalition of families and employers and just saying, no, the time is now. This is essential work and these jobs are needed now more than ever. Let's make them equally protected jobs. It's only fair. So the momentum has been great. And in Philadelphia, they have not just established really great legislation, but they keep building on it. They've mandated paid time off, and now they've passed a bill called the Power Act, which basically really strengthens the enforcement of these protections at the city level so that the city's labor enforcement department actually has the resources and capacity and expertise to make the laws real in people's lives, to make these rights real. And that's, I think that's one of our great challenges of this era is there are rights and protections that exist for workers, and we have to make those rights real. And we have to show working people that we're fighting for them and that they can fight too. And when they do, we are unstoppable. And that's what we're hoping that this group of domestic workers, right, the group that nobody believed could organize, is helping to shine the light on what's possible when we do.
And at the federal level, I believe Representative Jayapal and Senator Gillibrand have a National Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. I'm a co-sponsor of that. Tell us a little bit about, yeah, you're welcome. Tell us a little bit about that bill and again, why it's needed at the federal level.
So the exclusion of domestic workers from all of our excuse me. Um, the exclusion of domestic workers from our labor laws happens not just at the state level, but at the federal level.
Mhm.
And the fact that we have a bill in Congress that's led by Congresswoman Jayapal with great champions like yourself, like that is historic. That is about putting a stake in the ground and saying this work is dignified work,
Mhm.
real work like all other professions, and should be recognized and protected as such. So things like protection from discrimination, things like access to overtime and sick days,
Mhm.
they're the majority of domestic workers in our country don't have access to a single paid sick day, and most are at risk of being fired for
Yeah.
simply asking for a sick day because there is no job security.
Mhm.
And that's the other thing about the National Bill of Rights, is having clear work agreements so that
Mhm.
it's not just at the whim of every different household what some of these basic expectations are. And we think that it'll make access to care and these cleaning services better for the families, and clarifying all around for everyone involved what the expectations are, and for workers to know that their work is recognized and treated equally to other work in our economy. It's historic, honestly, that this bill was introduced at the federal level, and the number of sponsors and supporters we have is also a big source of inspiration and hope for this workforce that is so under attack right now.
I should know this and I don't. How many sponsors do you know offhand that you have in the House and the Senate roughly?
Since reintroduction, I don't know, but
Yeah.
in the last
Okay.
round, I believe we had over 130.
Wow, that's great.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
trust me, I've seen many bills, they don't get that. So that's a lot of organizing that you all are doing to get to that level.
That's what we do, Congressman.
Yes. That's terrific. Um, Anything else that we should be sharing with listeners to understand, whether it be the plight of domestic workers or things that we all can do to make the situation better? What else can we share?
Look, I think the most important thing for our listeners to know is that each and every one of us, we all have a stake in this issue. Sometimes when we think about domestic workers, we think it's this kind of small workforce in the shadows that's highly vulnerable. But care and caregiving and care work is a huge part of our both opportunity and challenge as Americans in the future. Right now, we're living in a country where 10,000 babies are born every day, and 10,000 of us turn 65, and we're living longer than ever. We're a country that needs more care. And if you are a family caregiver out there for a loved one who is ill or has dementia or Alzheimer's, you are among 11 million of us who are in that position. My own mother-in-law just recently had a fall and broke her neck, and her dementia has accelerated significantly. And so I'm just up to my eyeballs as well in
Yeah.
caregiving responsibilities. And this is something that we should not be alone on. We should be a country like many other developed countries that says we are going to build a workforce, a home care, direct care workforce. We're going to build infrastructure to make care affordable and accessible for everyone who needs it, because it's good for the economy, which we know it is.
Mhm.
And we as a country have yet to do that. And I believe that on the other side of this political crisis that we are in is a future where we can become the generation that puts the kind of caregiving systems in place for all of us, so that by the time, Congressman, you and I need that care, it will be in place, and it'll be a worker who has a great union job delivering those services, and we'll be able to know that everyone involved is taken care of. That future is possible, but we have to fight for it.
Mhm.
And part of it is showing up now for the immigrant caregivers and all the other caregivers who are going to be impacted by these cuts and by these raids, right? We have to show up now, but we also have to know that in our future is something way better than just a Medicaid program that's underfunded. We deserve better, and it's possible if we come together.
Well, and thanks to the work of you and your organization and the many, many workers who are helping on these efforts, we're going to make that happen. So, anything you can share with folks? How do they follow you on social media, or your organization, or yourself personally? You want to share any of the social media contact info?
Please, yes. You can follow me at iJenPoo on Instagram. I'm also on X and Blue Sky, and it's AIJENPOO. And you can also follow our organization at Domestic Workers on all the socials, and also at Caring Across Gen. Caring Across Generations is our sister organization that is organizing all kinds of people who have a stake in the future of care.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it. And, it's a workforce that, as you have pointed out throughout history, we've ignored too much in this country. But there's real progress right now, even with an administration like we currently have. And I think it's due to the work of yourself and your organization. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Well, we couldn't do it without our partners in Congress. So thank you, Congressman, for standing with domestic workers and for creating the space for this conversation. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to iJenPoo and the National Domestic Workers Alliance.